Okay, so this is video 4 for the progressive era, and in this area we're going to be talking about social legislation. Now, when you see the word social, I want you to think of people. Social has to do with people. Now, legislation has to do with laws, okay? So what we're going to be looking at, social legislation, laws having to do with people. That's right. Okay, so some of the legislation that was passed during the progressive age was regarding urban housing, and this was to make sure that housing facilities in the United States were safe. If you think about the conditions of tenements and how they're so close together, and you think of all the hazards that could happen in these really crowded, really dirty, unregulated areas, it was a problem. So social legislation passed through the progressive in the progressive era did help regulate that. Also, the ending of child labor. Remember, we talked about child labor being an issue during the Gilded Age. Now, during the progressive era, it has ended. And nowadays, you guys know that you have to be how old? You have to be 16 in order to work. Also, there was regulation as far as safety and health conditions in factories. If you remember before, factories were really unsafe places to work. You could lose life or limb. They also limited work hours. It wasn't as it was before. Remember, that was also something that the labor unions were fighting for, was shorter work hours for their workers. That also ties in with safety. Workers' compensation. Now, if you were hurt on the job, you would have assistance in dealing with those medical bills or all the issues that come along that when you don't have the means with which to work physically. You also had legislation regarding the conservation of natural resources. Now, Teddy Roosevelt actually becomes a huge advocate in this area, and you'll see that as we move forward in the comparison of the progressive presidents. You also had the preservation of wildlife and wildlife preserves. So civil service reform, this is having to do with jobs. And back in the day, you had what is known as a spoil system. It can also be referred to as the patronage system, and that's when government jobs are given as a reward, as a form of reward system for people who either made contributions or who somehow helped greatly with the campaign. So it's like, quid pro quo, I do for you if you do for me, and that's the way it worked with the political machines and with the bosses and stuff. The people that would help them were the ones that were going to get the government jobs. Now, this changed partly due to President Garfield being assassinated by one of the guys that he failed to give a job to. He had promised someone a job, he didn't give it to them, and he was then assassinated. Eventually, this stuff leads to the Pendleton Civil Service Act, Pendleton Civil Service Act. And what this law stated was that people were to be given jobs based on merit. Now, merit means you earned it, you are qualified, you should have that job based on your ability to do it, not just based on your party views. In other words, who you voted for or what your belief system is if you're going to help some politician get their way. We're also going to be looking at the suffrage movement. Now, this word suffrage has to do with voting rights. If you look over here at this picture, who are the people that are fighting for some type of liberty? These are women. So this area we're going to be looking at women's suffrage, meaning women's right to vote. Now, going back as far as 1848, if you remembered, we talked about the Civil War being between the years of 1861 to 1865. After the Civil War was over in 1865, after the fact, you have Reconstruction, and during Reconstruction, you get the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment. Remember those Civil War amendments. You get freedom, citizenship, and then finally, in the 15th Amendment, all men got the right to vote. But going far back as even before that, women were claiming at the Seneca Falls Convention that they were equal to men and that they should also have equal rights. Now, some of the leading women in the suffrage movement are Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So these are two very, very big names, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You also have the founding of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Suffrage, remember, voting rights. And finally, woo, what does it look like? 32 years later, in not 32 years later, what am I thinking? 72 years later, in 1920, you get the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment states that no state can deny a citizen the right to vote on the basis of sex or gender. So, meaning male or female. So now not only do African Americans have the right to vote, but so do women under the 19th Amendment, 1920. Okay, this is really important to remember. Remember, suffrage is women's rights. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this video. Be sure that you've got all your notes in order. If you haven't seen any of the previous videos, you need to do so. I'll see you in class. Have a great day.